great conductor and a dear longtime friend of mine. She used to be the associate conductor of the San Antonio Symphony. These days, she's the music director of the Mid-Texas Symphony, and she's wrapping up a period of several years working with the Minnesota Orchestra as their associate conductor. Welcome, Akiko. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Troy.
So we always like to start off by asking this question. How did you, as a teenager, decide to become a musician? What was your path into this world of classical music?
Well, I would say I think my teenage years are responsible for my life right now, actually. A lot of the seeds were planted then. When I was 14, my family and I relocated to California from Japan. And already I was playing the trombone, playing the piano, and singing in choir, the children's chorus in Tokyo. And so when I came over to the States and, went to public high school, in our area, music was really my link to the new culture and making new friends. And even if I couldn't understand a question on a math assignment, I could understand music, and I could read music and keep up. And so I would say band and choir were really important part of my high school years. Conducting also started sort of in high school, and I didn't volunteer to do it or anything, but my high school choir director was getting her master's while she was teaching full-time at our high school. So she would take off a lot of days from school, and she would hire a substitute who wasn't always necessarily a musician, let alone a conductor. And she would just say, you take the attendance and just have the student Akiko run the rehearsal. And she asked me to do that quite often my junior or senior, and I was older by then. And then one day we were singing like Christmas carols at a museum or something outdoor, and she suddenly said, hey, you want to conduct the next carol? And I did, and that was sort of like, oh my gosh, I love this, that connection with the singers, my peers, and that sense of trust. So that was a big aha moment for me, but I never in a million years thought that conducting was a job, that it was a career. I didn't grow up in a family of musicians. I'm the black sheep. So I just had zero concept of making a living as a musician, let alone going to like a conservatory or like majoring in music in college was like so far from my mind. So, I was on the path to go to a liberal arts university, and I did, but I did for my essay question on my college application, they had let us choose from a couple of different questions. And the question I picked was, what was the best conversation you ever had? And for my conversation, I picked that moment at the museum conducting a Christmas carol, and it was, nonverbal, but it was some of the best communication I ever experienced. So I remember that, but I promptly forgot about it. Went to college. I was determined to be a psychologist. So I started majoring in psychology, and I was taking music major classes on the side, kind of as a covert, unofficial music major. And of course I was singing. I was still playing the trombone, but that was kind of starting to recede in the background, and I was starting to take singing more seriously. And I was doing all the normal things that every freshman does in college, just enjoying the college life. And then sophomore year, I started taking introduction to conducting, and then, all the next steps, like advanced conducting or choral conducting, orchestra conducting, because I was interested. I also had a great teacher who taught the intro class and who is still one of my best friends today, and who really, I would actually call him responsible for me being a conductor today, because he really encouraged me. He taught me a lot of things I didn't know. But he had my back, and he gave me a lot of opportunities, especially for an undergraduate. And once I decided to really concentrate on conducting, I remember the summer after my sophomore year, I went back to him and said, Steve, I want to be a conductor, like for real, not just doing classes and this little piece and that, right? This is what I want to do. And I caught the bug. And he said, okay. And then since then he was 100% behind me and helped me make my videos for grad school applications, and still a great friend. We'll still keep in touch. But so that's sort of how, from out of the high school experience, I became a conductor. I really think the seeds were planted back then, and my high school directors were really, and my trombone teacher. I was taking private lessons. All three of them, the choir director, band director, and trombone teacher. I would say that triumvirate of support system and mentorship. I mean, it wasn't like I never said I wanted to be a conductor, although the choir director did say at one point, and she pulled me aside and said, you might consider doing this like for real. And I just kind of said, what does that even mean? I brushed it off, So, but I would say that triumvirate of teachers in high school was so important to, I think unknowingly, I was absorbing a lot of what they were doing and saying, and their styles on the podium and off the podium, the way they related to us, the way they taught us, and, sometimes disciplined us. And I think they were really formative. I just didn't know it at the time. Otherwise, I would say I was just absolutely crazy about music during high school. This is all I did. And my younger brother, who's a year younger than I am and went to the same high school, can attest to this. And he would say, you were never home. You were never home. I mean, he had totally different interests, like cross country and track and, basketball and things. But, he would just say, you were never home. And especially during the summers, I was always away, at marching band practice or this or that. And on weekends during the school year, of course, we had competitions and concerts and rehearsals and fun things. So I was just not around, and because of music. And this is all to say, I was just absolutely, this is all I did. And I think kudos to my parents, who never wanted me to go into music, professionally. That wasn't their intent, far from it. And they never imagined that I would want to be a conductor. But I think kudos to them for not, I think they really saw that music and academics, those were the two pillars of my high school years, and they protected those hours. And they said, these are the two things we want you to focus on whenever I kind of wanted to stray or, put my energy in something else. They kind of said, you need to focus on those two things that are clearly important to you, but this is the time. And I think I give them credit for that, for kind of silently, driving around to everything until I got my driver's license, driving my friends around to band practice. They were silently supportive, and they provided, what was needed if I wanted to pursue it, something at a higher level. I also knew about my playing and singing enough by then, and piano was totally like in the background by then, that I wasn't good enough to go to a conservatory or music school as an instrument major or voice major. It was just never, I tried out for some things, I wasn't accepted, and I could tell that there were so many other kids that were better and that practiced more. So I also knew that I wasn't cut out for the performance major. I just didn't know that there was something called conducting, like officially. So that's how it happened. And then once I got the bug, and I went to Eastman for my first master's. It was a master's in choral conducting, but the official title was just master's in conducting, because back then Eastman didn't have a program in graduate program in instrumental conducting. I think they may have had DMA doctorate programs, but not master's. So then all of us were treated kind of like all around conductors. So we were required to take conducting orchestra with a lab orchestra. And we studied with the orchestra conductor teacher as well as the choral teacher. And I think we were just sort of immersed. And it was my first kind of experience, kind of coming out of the cave into this world of, so many talented musicians my age and younger, because I was a graduate student, with so many different specialties and instruments and composing and early music, contemporary music, everything. I just didn't have that kind of background in high school and college. In a liberal arts setting. So it was great. And after that, during those 2 years, I pretty much quickly figured out after the first year, I wanted to actually be an orchestral conductor. Although I loved choral conducting and singing. I think I was preferred to sing in a choir more than conduct a choir. I don't know. It's like a cultural and personal thing. So, and my teacher, kudos to him, he was cool with it. He's like, yeah, I think that's what you should do. So, but I still finished my degree. And then I went to study with a different teacher at a different school at Boston University, to get my second master's in orchestral conducting. And after that, I hung around Boston for maybe 6 more years, basically as a freelance person with a lot of different jobs, like some not musical, some just to pay the bills and have health, full medical benefits and things like that. But some musical also, I started out conducting because right after your master's, you don't necessarily have a gig conducting. So, it blows my mind to think that I got to the Minnesota Orchestra in 2017, and I finished that degree at BU in 2001. So there was a 16-year gestation period. I was conducting somebody all the time, but it blows my mind to think that I wasn't waiting, because I didn't even know like there was such a thing as a staff conductor position at a professional orchestra. It's like I wasn't in that world yet. But it did take me 16 years from the end of my second master's degree to arriving in Minnesota, 3 years ago. So it does blow my mind now that I think about it. But every step, every job I've had in those 16 years has been super formative. And, I think it was Steve Jobs that said in like one of the commencement speeches he made, that said his life was like all these different events, but if you connect the dots, you can explain how he turned out to do what he ended up doing at Apple. And not comparing myself to a genius, but I do feel that I do agree with that connecting the dots, because my life definitely so far has not been of somebody who planned to get to be an associate conductor with the Minnesota Orchestra someday. That was not what I was gunning for, because I didn't even know that existed. So it is amazing. I just kept following what was right in front of me. And then every time I did get a new job somewhere or something, I was very absorbed in each of the jobs I did have in those 16 years. But I think I was always looking for the next step. Something, once I conquered this one step, then what is my next step? And I think that's how I always operated. That was my MO. And it took a long time. I mean, the two associate conductors before me at Minnesota Orchestra started this job when he was 22. And I think my immediate predecessor was 29 or something like that. So, it's amazing that we all have different paths. And because of our backgrounds and our personalities, and so it's been a great journey. I haven't been bored yet, and I would say my time, I was in San Antonio for I think like 5+ years, and I would say I would count those years as like basically in my recent life, like some of the most important experiences I ever had. And I got to work with YOSA a couple of times too, in like a side-by-side situation. Or I might have even filled in for you, Troy. I can't remember, at various times. And probably most of you that are in the audience today are too young to have crossed paths with me, at least as high school students. But, I just remember San Antonio being a great place to live and work, and all the arts organizations were so connected. And I learned a ton. I had a lot of great experiences, at San Antonio Symphony and beyond. And I think they really, and I was in that time of my life when I was sort of like a sponge, and it was fun to feel like I could do the job, but I was also still learning. So I would say those were really formative years as an adult. And I think this tells you that you can have the formative experiences in high school because you're young, like literally you're young. But you can also have formative experiences in your 30s and then continuing, So I think it's been a great journey. I have no idea what the future holds, but thankfully or not thankfully, conducting is not something where you can predict what's going to happen, um, except for some gigs that you were lucky enough to be invited to, or some jobs that you were lucky enough to get, and concerts that you were lucky enough to be asked to conduct. So those, I just try to put one, foot in front of the other, every year, and then see what happens. So that's the Akiko story.
Well, for what it's worth, Akiko, I have an old friend and classmate in Minneapolis who has worked with you, who
okay.
said to me that one of the great things you brought to the podium was more seasoning and experience than a lot of staff conductors have in roles like that, and that the orchestra was grateful for that. So
that's nice.
We actually had a question on that very topic. Somebody wrote, "Your journey is a wonderful example of discovering and honoring your own interests and desires while being incredibly patient. What counsel can you offer to students who are passionate about a future in music? With this long and winding road that you've been on, what do you wish you'd known when you were 18? Or what would you share with another young musician starting this journey?"
I wish I practiced more. I also wish I played in a different, you guys are already way ahead of me, the high school me, because I didn't play in a youth orchestra. I was so busy with band and choir at my school that I didn't join any ensemble outside. And also being a brass player, I don't know, well, clearly you guys are not guilty of this since you're in YOSA. But I was that shallow high school trombonist who was like, why would I want to count so many bars of rest when I could be playing almost every bar in band? And so I missed this great window of opportunity in my life. I wasn't aware of, learning repertoire by being inside the orchestra. And some, the groups like YOSA play basically professional level, like some of the greatest literature that any professional orchestra could hope to play. I mean, you guys are getting a lot of great literature repertoire under your belt, and I never did that. Partly my fault, but partly in the environment. And I wish I had that a little sooner in my life. And just, the sheer experience of learning those scores from the inside, even though while you're playing it or singing it, just because I sang or played some piece in band or choir, it doesn't mean I can conduct it well. It doesn't, actually, it's a very different perspective. But I think it just gives you street cred and some confidence. And I wish I had that. So you guys don't have to worry about that because you're in YOSA and you're already doing it. So keep being in YOSA. It's very, very important. And it's the greatest education. I wish I practiced more in my private lessons. My trombone teacher would always say, why don't you ever practice? And part of it is that I was quite a good sight reader. So I was very good at the digital part of music. And I think I have good ears, I think. So the digital and the visual and our oral parts were not a problem with me, since I was a little. But the tactile act of playing, developing your technique and connecting that with the musicianship, because until you're better on your instrument, you don't get to play better literature. You just can't. And you cannot replace quick thinking or sight reading or good ear. I mean, those things cannot replace technique ever. Your minimum proficiency level is all about your technique, and your technique allows you to do fancy things. So I wish, and I just was not a very physical kid. I was never, and I'm not blaming this as a reason why I didn't become a master of any one of the three instruments I played and took lessons on. But I wish I went further. Even if I didn't wind up being a performance major, I wish I went a little further on each one of my three instruments in my private lessons, just really getting down to the physical act of like building technique. Because I mean, that's all you've got if you want to do something good. And I think what was lucky for me was conducting wise, I didn't really have any physical barriers to begin with. And I think that I'm sure that's why I stuck with it, because the actual physical gesture part of it came naturally to me. But there's tons of other areas of conducting. I mean, because the physical part is just like tip of the iceberg. So there are tons of other areas of my life where I wished I had sooner in my life before I decided to be a conductor. One of them is languages, and I thought I was good at languages because English is my second language. I made a good transition, in a relatively short period of time from Japan to the United States as a teenager, and I was very confident of my language abilities until I, started meeting all these classical musicians who speak gazillion other languages, and they're quite comfortable with it. And this is, in Europe, a lot of people are multilingual to begin with, and they speak English well. So, and especially if you're in classical music, a lot of orchestras are international now, so you have colleagues from around the world. And so, I mean, I don't need to be fluent, but I really wish, and I studied some, German and stuff, but it's now the more I do in my professional life, the more I realize it was not enough. What I thought was enough or passable for whatever I was doing when I was in college or whatever. And I took Spanish too because I was in California, but it was not enough. And I, obviously those of you guys in YOSA should pick up as many, or, definitely if you're interested in being a conductor, you must be multilingual and multicultural. And I'm ashamed to say I'm only bilingual and bicultural, even though I always, having grown up in California, I always prided myself on being multicultural, as a person, because my high school and college populations reflected, it was like 30% Asian at least, and it seemed very diverse to me, or it's diverse enough. But I realized that, a lot of the repertoire that we play are European, and obviously opera, and so the language is a regret. And I think, I don't want to overwhelm our audience today with kind of the endless kind of beating myself up about not being good at this or that. It's only if you want to keep going in one direction. It's only because I kept going in conducting, and I didn't settle at one level wherever I had arrived at. And so I kept going to the next step, kept going on. And I was like, I was supposed to know this. Oh, okay. Wow. My colleagues know this and I don't. And, when you're younger, you can still, you still have time and the flexibility of your brain to adopt some new skills. You're not going to learn to be a concert pianist at age 25, but you might be able to master another foreign language. I don't know, if you worked really hard or if you went to live there and study there. So there are a lot of things you can do in your 20s. And I did, I think I just didn't know, because I was so like inching toward this invisible goal of just bettering myself and challenging myself to go to the next level each time. I didn't start out with like a foundation, like a prepackaged deal. I was not a Blue Apron kind of like everything is already set and cut for you. And if you have these ingredients, you will have a successful meal. I was not that. I was very much like, oh, I happen to see this on sale today, so I got this and let me see what I can make with it. Like that was sort of my life, and it still is. I'm enjoying it, but it's haphazard. And as I keep going in my field, of course, I meet so many people that had a very strong foundation in all things classical music and just sort of a level of culture. So it can be overwhelming, but I was watching, since COVID happened, there's been a lot of roundtables, discussions on Zoom, like the one we're having. There's been quite a few with conductors. There's one where a conductor named Michael Morgan was on, and I happened to catch a part of this where he said, within the classical music industry, you just have to find your corner. Like, there are so many different ways of being a conductor, and there's so many kinds of conductors. None of us are good at every kind of ensemble, every kind of repertoire, but everyone kind of, if you're lucky, you find your corner of the industry. And he felt that he did when he landed his Oakland gig. And when I heard that, I was like, that's very well said. And, sometimes you don't know when you've landed in your corner, in that corner of the industry. But I think that's, as I get older, I also think it's important to enjoy that instead of, just randomly putting more things in my shopping cart and trying to superficially get good at something, because I realize now it takes a long time, and sometimes start in childhood or youth to really, understand, master certain things. And so I guess all I've said, I mean, there's a long way to answer that question, but I would say everything you do, if you want to be a professional musician, everything you do later is based on how well prepared you are now. And I really wish I could play in YOSA, be a high school student again and play in YOSA, and I don't wish to start everything over, but I think, I look at all of you guys having these experiences, and I think how much more that would have added to what I have now. So I think I would just say, keep doing what you're doing, but, really, when somebody tells you to practice, or somebody tells you to listen to a piece, or, go to rehearsal, I mean, something like that, it's annoying and you're busy and everything. Well, before COVID anyway, but it's hard to fit music into everything. But if you even have a remote inkling that you want to be a professional musician, seriously do those things now while you're at this age, because some things you can only develop when you're at your age, and even college. Some people on some instruments is considered sort of the last time that you're going to change something about your playing, so even though you'll grow a lot as a musician and as a person. So I think just know that this is a great time for you guys to, just firm up a lot of foundations. And then even if you don't end up using that skill right now or in the next 5 years, it's gonna come back at you. It's gonna benefit you or backfire at you, trust me. So nothing is a waste. That is sort of my motto. Nothing is a waste. And if you have a job that has nothing to do with music right now, to earn money for this or that, that's not a waste either. That's one of the connecting dots thing, that Steve Jobs said, that's going to help you so much. And I can't tell you, how many kind of non-music jobs, kind of day jobs I had after grad school that I only took because of money or health insurance or both. They helped my conducting career so much. So nothing that you do is a waste, whether it's musical or non-musical. Just, do it well and enjoy it, and then feel, just enjoy for what it is giving you right now, but know that it's gonna just pay itself back tenfold when you're older and you actually want to live a life. So
I appreciate that so much, and it's definitely been my shared experience that you can't prepare too much in your youth. There's this old saying that luck is when opportunity meets preparation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd heard that for years and thought, okay, yeah, I get that. But when I was about 40, which was a while ago, I got a phone call from the San Antonio Symphony. This was actually before you came to San Antonio.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was a conductor had gotten sick, and they asked if I could do a rehearsal on the Stravinsky Symphony in C Less than an hour later. Well, when I was 21, had spent a couple of days in the library at school listening to the Symphony in C with a score and doing a formal analysis. I was thinking of it as a composer, but I got to know that piece really well. And so I was intimidated, but I was able to say, yeah, you know what? I can do a rehearsal on that piece.
Yeah, you know the piece. Yeah.
Yeah, I rushed over, and I still had to, very quickly mark in some meter changes and, some, how do I conduct these things?
But basics. That's secondary to actually knowing the piece, which is
right. I was actually able to get a little bit of work done and move the orchestra forward until the conductor was feeling better and could step in. And it really underlined for me this idea that, I'm so glad that in my 20s I did that. I wish I had done that more. I wish there'd been more times where instead of, taking a nap or going to the movies, I had practiced or studied scores But the more you acquire those skills, they come back, right? We live in this career, if you're a musician, where you're building a brick wall and every little thing you do is another brick. And sometimes it's several years before you realize how much that's holding up what you're doing. So
that's right.
And that brings me to another question for you. As a staff conductor with the San Antonio Symphony, with the Minnesota Orchestra, one of the things that you do as a staff conductor is conduct a really wide variety of repertoire. You do things like Fiesta Pops in San Antonio, you do holiday music, you might do movie music. And I wonder whether that breadth of repertoire that you've experienced has enriched your relationship with the so-called legit classical repertoire. In other words, the fact that you know more Latino music.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
How do you think we as conductors should incorporate a broader range of repertoire? And especially right now, I'm thinking about Black composers. But in your work, how has your work doing other kinds of concerts informed what you do in the sort of more traditional classical programming?
Yes. Well, I have a very literal answer to that and sort of like more abstract. So let me tell you the literal answer. So speaking of connecting the dots, so in San Antonio, yes, I was both like education conductor and the pops conductor primarily, although we had other guests here and there. In Minnesota, I did primarily the education concerts. And we have a separate principal pops conductor, Sarah Hicks, and she does the pops. She's a primary person for that, although we have guests for that series as well. And then she also does all the movies, unless she's not available, and then she does, some, but she does most of the movie concerts. So I actually never did the movie concerts, but in San Antonio, I was sort of the everything person that our music director, Sebastian Lang-Lessing, and maybe the 4 or 5 guest conductors we had on the classical series did not do. So I did get a wide variety of experience, and the pops really was a huge part of my diet. I hadn't really done pops concerts until then, but I was very lucky because in my children's chorus in Tokyo, we were made to sing both classical and pops arrangements and folk songs and all the things that you sing in choirs. So it was a steady diet. And also in band, I remember playing wind ensemble repertoire, but also a lot of pops arrangements, things inspired by I played in jazz band in high school, all 4 years. So, and I also listened to a lot of like Glenn Miller and a lot of jazz, like just growing up at home too. So I would say I actually knew quite a bit of popular music just because of my life, my background. It was not, and so when I was asked to do these concerts in San Antonio, I was like, sure, game on. And what I've always felt was popular music. There's, super high level stuff. And I don't mean complex or anything. I mean, just like really great tunes, really well-written songs. I mean, all the great songwriters, American Songbook. I mean, to me, they're just as important as Beethoven, Mozart, and Haydn. They had a technique. They knew how to move people. They knew how to fit words, into sounds. And so I always had kind of just as equal respect for popular music. I just didn't know I was gonna be like conducting arrangements of like with a symphony orchestra. So I was like, oh, okay. But I was very comfortable. But two things really stand out in my mind that were really formative for me in San Antonio. One is Fiesta Pops, to work, as you have done, Troy, to work with, Campanas, the mariachi group, and Guadalupe Dance Company, and every year that builds your repertoire of, and I knew nothing. I was so scared when I was not scared of American pop music, but I was scared of that. Because I was like, I don't know anything. And actually a lot of the rhythms are very tricky, more than meets the eye. And it's not something we studied to play in conservatory. So none of us, the San Antonio Symphony actually is the best orchestra to play that repertoire because they know it. And they play it every year. So they're actually quite amazing at all the complex rhythms and styles. Anyway, so I did that for 4 years, once a year. And then toward the end of my time in San Antonio, I was also asked to do a gospel meets Broadway meets, I forgot what the third genre was, pops concert. And the general manager at the time and we almost like died putting that concert together, but we did. And it was one of the most gratifying musical experiences of my life. We worked with kind of a gathering of multiple gospel church choirs from Black churches around San Antonio. And, we spoke completely different musical languages. Their tradition was oral, and ours is very visual. We do things by what's on the page or with a print. And we're very like, well, it doesn't say so. The composer didn't say, put an accent there. So we're very literal, and they're just oral and also very spiritual. And so, you have these two rehearsals to put everyone together kind of thing. Two groups that come from totally different, backgrounds. But I absolutely fell in love with the genre. And I remember some of my colleagues being like, and the audience members being like, this was like an amazing experience. It really lifted us up and we learned a lot, and we were humbled by the experience. And so fast forward a couple of years, I moved to Minnesota, and last summer they decided to do a summer festival. They have a summer season and a Latin themed summer season. And I was supposed to do something with a pops person, a Latina pops artist, but then that somehow fell through. So then I was asked to put together like basically whatever I thought was best on one rehearsal. And so basically I went back into my 4 years of Fiesta Pops programs. And this is not the same kind of program, but there was a lot of overlap that I could use, including, favorites like Wapango. I pulled that out because I was like, well, this is practically, an official Mexican national anthem. And, for an orchestra, you have to play this. We had dancers, folklorical dancers from the Twin Cities, from St. Paul. And it was my chance to kind of bring this repertoire to the Minnesota Orchestra, this is not what they do normally at all. And I remember, before I left San Antonio, I was talking to one of the San Antonio Symphony musicians, and he said, maybe you can bring some of this repertoire to Minnesota. Like you can, and then I was thinking like, really? Like, and then once I got to Minnesota, I realized it's not the kind of thing they do because it just reached a different region. So I quickly forgot about it, but then that person's words came true. And, it was hard putting it together. And it was a half kind of North American, half South American, half middle. It was a kind of a half Mexican and South American and then half Northern American thing. So it wasn't totally Latin, but it's just what ended up working out for the situation. So I was so thankful for my Fiesta Pops experience. And speaking of feeling comfortable, like kind of like you with Symphony in C by Stravinsky, by then I was like totally in love with the Latin culture that I had learned in San Antonio. The people and the music and the food, I mean, just the vibe in San Antonio is just so amazing. I loved it. And I could kind of pour all of that into this concert. And I was so gratified personally. And then also for Fiesta Pops, I was lent a skirt, you know, sewn by, handmade by one of the official Fiesta designers. And then I took it with me because it's not, I don't own it, but the designer was like, I don't need it back because it was already like adapted to my size. And then the symphony was like, they didn't ask me, for it back. So I took it with me to Minnesota and I wore it proudly for my concert in Minnesota last August. So that was sort of a great meeting of my, the connecting of the dots. And then the gospel thing, I have not had to, and I, before the end of my tenure here in August, I will not have an opportunity to do that music with the Minnesota Orchestra, but that's okay because the Minnesota Orchestra, makes great efforts to play in North Minneapolis, which is a largely African-American neighborhood. And as part of that, they bring gospel charts. And I would just be covering or just hanging out in the back corner of the room. I wouldn't be conducting, the music director would, but I knew all like most of the songs, because of that gospel pops that I thought I had to do, but which was like really lucky for me because I think those two, the Black church music tradition and also the Latin, the mariachi and the folk music and the dancing traditions, they both are totally not part of a Western trained classical musician's diet. And I was so lucky that I was forced by situations, by my jobs, to really like confront them in my own way, even though it was like just like a one-off situation each time. But it really gives you new repertoire. I think it's about having different vocabularies in your bag of tricks. And I may never conduct these pieces again, depending on the circumstances, depending on the groups I conduct. They never come out of the bag of tricks, but then they're there. And I've built a certain comfort level in those genres. And that is a great gift, just like it was for you with the Stravinsky. Stravinsky, some conductors love Stravinsky. And they already gravitated toward his music, growing up and studying while they were students. So when they do get asked to guest conduct, they say, how about some Stravinsky? Because they know that they are better at it. Like if you love something, you're automatically better at it than somebody else who doesn't. This is an iron rule of conducting. And I also remember, one of my musician colleagues in San Antonio Symphony said, Akiko, just not because I did something wrong, but because another conductor did something wrong. He said, don't ever program something that you're not passionate about because it shows. And I took that to heart. As a staff conductor, you have to do everything. You cannot choose what genre of music. You have to do everything. Sometimes you get to kind of squeeze in like what you really wanted to do that was on your bucket list, but then, self-interest show very clearly in staff conductor's life. So you try not to do that too much. You try to do what's right for the situation, but something you're comfortable with. But as you graduate from the staff conductor, which I'm about to do, you still have to be able to conduct, you can't say, oh, I don't want to conduct that or that. You have to embrace everything, all genres of music, but you have to know what you absolutely love, because you're an advocate for that composer and for that genre of music. So if you look down upon something, or if you think something is not good, you should not touch it with a 10-foot pole. You should stay away and say, you know what, that's not the right concert for me, or that's not the right piece for me. I would rather do this, or maybe somebody else. You have to be able to say that, because you have to respect you have to know that somebody else out there in your field knows that piece really well, has loved it for a long time, and has done it 20 times or more, and can convince everybody of the value of the piece much better than you. So you should not do something just because you can. And I think that's kind of the biggest takeaway from my Minnesota job. I've been here for 3 seasons now, and a big part of my job is covering all the different maestros that came through our door on the subscription series. And I just sort of, I mean, when you get asked to guest conduct, you bring your best stuff. You know, if you're meeting an orchestra for the first time, you bring your absolute best stuff. And then once you have a long-term relationship with an orchestra, then you can do something more exploratory. But a lot of the guest conductors I saw, and also now we're in search mode for the music director to succeed Osmo Vanska in 2 years. So everyone's antenna is a little bit more on. Each guest conductor is a potential something, some future relationship. And it's been really great to see how to see everybody bring their A game. And it really taught me and humbled me and say, it's great that I've been a generalist, and I probably will be a generalist for a long time, maybe forever, I don't know, depending on my corner of the industry. And that's okay too. And it's important to know as many composers and be comfortable with as many as possible, especially the standard repertoire. But you really should only bring stuff that you really are convinced about by the time you get on that podium, or even before you suggest the piece to the administration when you're programming something. You have to feel like nobody else can do it better than you, even though there are a lot of people in the world who can. You have to be convinced that you bring so much love and passion to this piece. So yeah, this has been very contrasting, kind of a grain of education, or some learning that's really particular to this period in my life. So.
Well, that brings us to a great place to wrap up, I think, which is to ask, what is or are those corners of the repertoire for you? Who are the composers? What are those pieces, the 2 or 3 things that you think of as the core of Akiko's repertoire? If you were asked to conduct the New York Philharmonic next year, what do you want to bring?
I don't know. I actually don't have that corner yet. And I was just saying, to my husband the other day, like literally the other day, I really need to start choosing things that is my, not specialty, but something that I know I can do really well. And I've also discovered that just because you love a composer or style of music, it doesn't make you good at it. But you're more convincing, and you should not do it without the love and affinity for it. And I would say the Latin and stuff that I did get to build in San Antonio is not even close to being a specialty, but it is because of my limited exposure to it, even with the repetition in San Antonio. But it's something I have affinity for, and I have love for, and I have some shallow understanding of. So for the other stuff, I would say I've had a lot of luck connecting with Dvorak's music. I'm talking about like standard repertoire, and Strauss, Beethoven has always been favorite, somebody I really connected with, but don't we all? And my first few months with the San Antonio Symphony was covering Sebastian Lang-Lessing doing the entire Beethoven symphony cycle, because it was a festival, and I remember being blown away, watching Sebastian do everything from memory, and realizing that also then that just because I thought I loved Beethoven, it doesn't mean that I have, but so but not every Beethoven symphony, like even of the ones I've done, there are certain ones that I feel I had success in, and I feel like I can get up and do it any day, even though every time will be better and more, and I should always study more. And there are a couple of ones that I did, but I know I didn't quite squeeze everything out of, because there's something about that piece that's very, that escapes me still. So I'm still trying to figure out what my repertories, but I'm comfortable enough with myself as a conductor now. I've arrived at a point where I feel confident conducting just about anything, but it doesn't mean that I know what that first card that I bring is, the calling card is. Yeah. So to be determined. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Akiko. It's been really great to chat with you. And I would remind everybody in the San Antonio region that Akiko is the music director of the Mid-Texas Symphony. And so when we are all able to start going to concerts again, we should make sure to drive up and check out the Mid-Texas Symphony, a great local professional orchestra where Akiko's been doing some really remarkable work. Thanks again, Akiko. It was great to have you with us. Any closing thoughts?
Thank you, Troy. I'm really happy that I got to visit with you and YOSA because, again, my time in San Antonio is really one of the highlights of my career so far. And I'm glad I'll be a little closer to you guys. And yes, when I'm in Seguin or New Braunfels, I hope to see you guys, and I hope to visit the San Antonio Symphony and YOSA as well. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Akiko. Thanks, everybody. We will look forward to seeing you all next week. Next week, we have on YOSA Live Chats, electric violinist Tracy Silverman from Nashville, who's going to be with us. He's a wonderful performer and composer in a wide variety of styles, and really looking forward to chatting with him. So please come back and see us next Sunday. Thanks very much.